"Get in my wagon now," wealthy rancher tells homeless mother of three. His stunning act shocks all. Sarah had always been proud of her ability to take care of her family. She was a mother of three children, and though she didn't have much, she made sure her kids had enough to eat, clothes to wear, and a safe place to sleep. Life had been tough, but she had always managed to scrape by. She worked long hours as a waitress in a small diner, earning just enough to pay the rent and put food on the table. The tips were never great, but Sarah didn't mind. She loved her job because it allowed her to meet people and chat with the customers. She was a friendly soul, always smiling, always putting others at ease. But everything changed when Sarah fell ill. It started with a persistent cough, something that seemed harmless at first. She ignored it, thinking it would go away on its own. But weeks passed, and the cough only worsened. Soon, she found herself unable to work, bedridden and weak. When she finally went to the doctor, the news wasn't good. She had a respiratory infection, and the doctor recommended she take several weeks off to recover. But without a paycheck, Sarah couldn't afford to take time off. Bills piled up and her savings quickly dwindled away. After a month of being out of work, Sarah's landlord called. She had fallen behind on the rent. The conversation was brief but harsh. The landlord told her that if she couldn't come up with the money soon, she'd be evicted. Sarah promised to find a way, but deep down, she knew she was running out of time. Her kids were scared. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they could sense the tension. They asked why there was no food on the table or why their mother seemed so tired all the time. Sarah did her best to reassure them, but inside, she was terrified. She had always been able to take care of them, but now she felt helpless. Every day was a struggle to keep them warm, to keep them fed. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone in the small apartment, looking around at the empty walls. She used to dream of a better life, of being able to give her children everything they needed. But now those dreams seemed distant, as if they belonged to someone else. She had no idea how she was going to make it through the winter, let alone keep the roof over their heads. The next day, Sarah sold her phone to buy enough food for a few days. She tried to put on a brave face for the kids, but they could see through her facade. They asked if they could have some candy, but Sarah had no money to spare. Instead, she made them some bread and butter, pretending everything was fine. But that night, as they lay in bed, Sarah could hear the wind howling outside, and she wondered just how much longer they could survive like this. As the days passed, things only got worse. Sarah found herself growing weaker, her body exhausted from lack of proper nutrition. She had stopped looking for work, too embarrassed to go back to the diner after everything that had happened. The thought of asking for help crossed her mind more than once, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She had always prided herself on her independence. Asking for help felt like admitting failure. One cold morning, Sarah woke up to find the apartment freezing. The heater had broken down, and there was no money to fix it. She wrapped the kids in as many blankets as she could find and huddled together for warmth. The sight of her children shivering in the cold broke her heart, but she didn't know what else to do. She couldn't even take them to school because there was no gas in the car. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next. If the landlord didn't evict them, what would she do when winter really set in? How would she keep her children safe from the cold? Sarah spent every waking moment trying to figure out how to make it all work. But the truth was, she didn't know how much longer she could hold on. That afternoon, Sarah decided to go for a walk to clear her mind. She bundled up in her old coat, hoping to get some fresh air and maybe find a way to get a little more food. She wasn't sure where she was going, but the walk helped her escape the constant worry. She passed the local stores and saw people rushing around, getting ready for the holidays. Some had bags full of food, others had gifts, but it only made her feel more isolated. She had nothing to give her children for Christmas, and she didn't know how she was going to explain it to them. As Sarah walked down the street, she passed a bus stop where a man was standing, waiting for the next bus. She didn't recognize him, but there was something about his presence that caught her attention. He looked like someone who had seen hard times but had managed to keep going. He had a gentle expression on his face, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Sarah looked away quickly, feeling embarrassed for no reason at all. Her thoughts were interrupted when a loud horn sounded, followed by the rumble of a car pulling up beside her. She glanced up, startled, as the black wagon came to a stop. The window rolled down and a voice from inside called out, "Are you all right?" Sarah hesitated, unsure if she had heard the man correctly. She was used to people ignoring her, but this man, his voice was calm and kind. She looked closer and saw that he was well-dressed, his clothes neat and expensive-looking. He was someone who clearly had wealth, someone far removed from her own life. For a moment, Sarah thought of walking away, but something inside her stopped her. The man's gaze was gentle, and there was an earnestness in his voice. She stepped closer, cautiously, wondering what he wanted. The man repeated his question. "Are you all right? You look like you could use some help." It wasn't a typical offer of charity. His words were not filled with pity, but with genuine concern. Sarah felt a flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt in weeks. Could this man be offering something more than just a handout? Could this be the help she so desperately needed? And just like that, Sarah's life was about to change forever. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing. The car beside her was sleek and shiny, far different from the beat-up old car she'd been living in for weeks. She wasn't used to people noticing her, at least, not in the way the man in the wagon was. Most people either ignored her or gave her a quick glance and turned away. But this man, with his neatly pressed clothes and calm demeanor, had taken the time to stop. His question lingered in her mind. "Are you all right?" It was a simple question, but for Sarah it felt like a lifeline being thrown into the deep water she'd been struggling in for so long. She had never been one to ask for help, but in that moment, standing on the sidewalk with nowhere else to turn, the idea of help didn't seem so impossible. "Are you all right?" the man repeated, his tone sincere. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She looked at him for a moment, trying to gauge his intentions. She had been burned before by well-meaning people who promised help but delivered nothing but empty promises. Was this man like the others, or was there something different about him? She finally nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just fine," she said, her words betraying her. She wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine for weeks, but she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. It felt too vulnerable, too much like giving up. The man didn't seem convinced. He studied her for a moment, his eyes soft but firm, as if he could see through the layers of pride and fear that Sarah had carefully built up over the years. "You don't look fine," he said gently. "I've seen people go through hard times. If you need something, I can help." Sarah flinched at his words. Help. She didn't want to admit that she needed help, but the words felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. She had been running on empty for so long, her pride and independence keeping her from accepting anything, even the smallest act of kindness. But here, in front of this stranger, the walls she had built up seemed to crumble a little bit. He didn't sound like someone offering pity. There was no judgment in his voice, no superiority. It was just simple concern, a quality Sarah hadn't encountered much in the world she had been struggling to survive in. "I don't know what I can offer you," Sarah said, shaking her head. "I don't have much. I don't even know where we'll sleep tonight." The man's expression didn't change. He simply nodded as if he understood more than she could say. "I'm Henry," he introduced himself, his voice steady. "And I've got a little more to offer than I think you know. You don't have to tell me everything now, but if you need help, I'm willing to give it." Sarah was taken aback. A part of her wanted to tell him to leave her alone, to tell him that she didn't need anyone's help, especially not someone like him. But another part of her, a quiet part she hadn't listened to in a long time, wondered if this could be the chance she had been praying for. She looked down at her feet, shifting from one to the other, and then looked back up at Henry. I don't know. I don't want to take advantage of anyone." Henry smiled, though it wasn't a smile of pity. It was simply a gentle, understanding smile. "It's not about taking advantage. It's about people looking out for one another. You'd do the same if you could, wouldn't you?" Sarah's mind raced. He was right. She had always helped others when she could, always given what little she had, even if it was just a kind word or a warm meal. But now she was the one in need, and it felt strange to consider asking for anything in return. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Why would you help someone like me? I'm not used to people like you offering anything." Henry didn't seem fazed by her hesitation. Instead, he simply looked her in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "I saw you earlier today. You looked like you were struggling, like you had no place to turn," he said. "I've been around long enough to know when someone is at their breaking point, and I believe you deserve better than just getting by." Sarah's heart twisted in her chest. No one had ever looked at her that way before, not like she was worth something. She had always been the one to care for others, the one to hold everything together, even when she felt like she was falling apart. But here was Henry, a man she didn't know, offering her the very thing she had longed for but never thought she could have, kindness without strings attached. "I'm just trying to keep my kids safe," Sarah whispered, looking down at the pavement. She could feel her eyes start to burn with unshed tears. She hadn't cried in so long, but the weight of everything, the constant worry, the exhaustion, the helplessness, was finally too much to hold in. Henry nodded again, his expression softening. "I understand. And I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. You don't have to struggle all by yourself." It was then that Sarah realized how badly she had needed to hear those words. All this time, she had been carrying the weight of everything on her shoulders, convinced that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But Henry had shown her a different way. A way where it wasn't about weakness or pride, it was about survival. It was about acknowledging that sometimes we all need a little help to get by. "Come with me," Henry said, breaking her thoughts. "Let me help you. I'm not asking you to do anything for me. I just want to make sure you and your kids are all right." Sarah's mind raced as she considered his offer. The idea of leaving her familiar surroundings, even if they were falling apart, was daunting. But something in Henry's eyes told her that this wasn't some empty promise. It was a genuine offer of help, of support. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the turning point she had been waiting for. With a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll come with you." Henry smiled again, a small but reassuring smile, and opened the door to the wagon. "It's going to be all right," he said gently. "You're not alone in this anymore." As Sarah climbed into the car, she couldn't help but feel a small weight lifting from her shoulders. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better. As the wagon rolled down the dusty road, Sarah couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was grateful, thankful even, for the opportunity Henry was offering. She hadn't felt this kind of hope in a long time. But another part of her was still skeptical. She had been let down by people before, and trust didn't come easily to her. Still, as she glanced over at Henry, driving calmly with a steady hand on the wheel, she realized he wasn't like the others. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no rush to get something from her. His actions seemed genuine, and for once, Sarah allowed herself to believe in that. The drive to Henry's ranch wasn't long, but it felt like an eternity for Sarah. The children, who had been quiet at first, started to stir in the backseat. Her youngest, Noah, who had been resting his head on her shoulder, looked up with wide eyes. "Mom, where are we going?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. Sarah didn't know exactly how to answer. She hadn't fully processed what was happening herself. "We're going to a safe place," she replied softly, brushing a lock of hair away from his face. "We'll be okay now." Her words were meant to reassure him, but she wasn't entirely sure she was convincing herself. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. The ranch appeared in the distance, its massive gates slowly coming into view. As the wagon approached, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had heard of Henry's ranch, of course. It was one of the most prosperous in the region, a sprawling estate that seemed to stretch endlessly. People whispered about it, and the stories often painted it as a world of luxury and excess. But Sarah had never dared to imagine that she would one day set foot on such a place. When the wagon passed through the gates, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the place. The land seemed to go on forever, dotted with fields and large barns. She could hear the faint sound of cattle in the distance, but what caught her attention most were the tall, well-maintained buildings and the lush greenery that surrounded everything. The house itself stood at the center of the ranch, grand and impressive, with wide windows and a beautiful porch. It was everything Sarah had imagined it would be, and more. Henry slowed the wagon and stopped just outside the front entrance. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach as the children looked around, their faces a mix of awe and uncertainty. "This is where we'll be staying," Henry said, turning to Sarah with a calm smile. "It's not much, but it's home." Sarah hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the wagon. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing: they were no longer on the edge of survival. They were here, in this vast and seemingly secure place. The thought was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, Sarah felt the weight of the past few weeks press down on her again. Henry led them inside, and as they stepped through the door, Sarah was immediately struck by the warmth. The house smelled of fresh wood and something rich and earthy, a scent that made her feel like she was finally entering a place where she could rest. The large living room was decorated with comfortable furniture, soft rugs on the floor, and paintings on the walls. There was a large fireplace at one end, and a fire was crackling merrily within it. It was cozy, inviting, and very different from the cold, barren apartment Sarah had been living in just days before. "Make yourselves at home," Henry said, his voice soft as he gestured toward the large couch. "I'll get you something to eat." The kids were already exploring, their faces lighting up as they walked around the room. Sarah felt her heart swell with relief as she watched them. For the first time in so long, they seemed safe from the cold, the hunger, and the fear that had been their constant companions. Sarah could hardly believe it. The idea that she and her children were now in this home, with all its warmth and comfort, was almost too much to grasp. She sank into one of the chairs, still a bit dazed. Her body was tired from the stress of the past few weeks, but her mind was racing. Was this really happening? Was this some kind of dream? Or was it the fresh start she had been waiting for? Henry returned a few minutes later with a tray of food. The sight of it, hearty stew, fresh bread, and a pitcher of cold water, made Sarah's stomach growl. She hadn't realized just how hungry she was until the food was right in front of her. Henry set the tray down on the coffee table and smiled as he noticed the kids eyeing the food eagerly. "Eat," he said gently. "You've earned it." As Sarah helped her children fill their plates, she felt a sense of gratitude wash over her. This wasn't just food, it was a lifeline. It was something she hadn't expected to have, especially not in such abundance. It was a gesture of kindness she had almost forgotten could exist. She watched her children eat, their little faces lighting up with each bite. They were happy, content, and for the first time in a long time, they weren't worrying about where their next meal would come from. After they had eaten, Henry showed them around the house. There were more rooms than Sarah could count, each one more comfortable than the last. The kids were already choosing which room they wanted, excitedly running from one to the other, imagining where they would sleep. Sarah didn't stop them. She let them dream for once, let them feel the joy of choosing their own beds, their own space. Henry, meanwhile, took Sarah aside and asked if she felt comfortable. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," he said, "and if you'd like, you can work here as well. There's plenty to do on the ranch. I can't pay much, but I can offer you a steady job. And more than that, I can offer you the chance to rebuild. You don't have to worry anymore." Sarah was overwhelmed by his generosity. She had never thought she'd find herself in a position like this, being offered a job, a place to stay, and the opportunity to start over. It felt too good to be true, but as she stood there in that warm house, surrounded by her children and the kindness of a man she barely knew, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a dream after all. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. She didn't know how else to express what she was feeling. There were no words that could adequately describe the gratitude she felt, the relief that was slowly washing over her. But Henry smiled again, his calm demeanor never faltering. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "Just take care of yourself and your family, that's all I ask." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah believed that things might finally be all right. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to live again. Days passed quickly, and Sarah found herself starting to settle into the rhythm of life at Henry's ranch. The first few nights were hard, not because of anything to do with the ranch, but because Sarah wasn't used to the comfort. It had been so long since she'd felt this secure, and her mind kept running, always searching for a reason why it might end. But every morning she woke up to the smell of breakfast cooking and the sight of her children laughing together. It felt real. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to adjust to her new life. The ranch was beautiful, with wide fields of green and towering barns that stretched toward the sky. She quickly got used to the sound of cows in the distance and the occasional whinny of horses. Henry was kind but also very busy. He ran the ranch with an attention to detail that Sarah admired. He taught her how to care for the animals and showed her how to help in the barn, all while never rushing her, never making her feel like she didn't belong. Her job, although not glamorous, gave her a sense of purpose. Every morning, she would join Henry and the other workers to feed the cattle, clean the stalls, and make sure the horses had enough water. The work was hard, but it wasn't the kind of hard work she had grown used to, where there was never enough to go around. Here, there was always enough food, enough space, enough time. She felt like she was contributing, doing something meaningful for the first time in a long time. The days were long, but Sarah found herself enjoying them. She felt connected to the earth in a way she hadn't expected. The simple act of taking care of the animals, watching them grow stronger and healthier, gave her a deep sense of satisfaction. The children were thriving as well. They had settled into their new school and their teachers were kind. It was a stark contrast to the schools they had attended in the past, where the kids were often bullied or made to feel out of place. Here, they were surrounded by other children who understood what it meant to work hard, and they quickly made friends. Sarah couldn't help but smile when she saw them playing outside, their laughter carrying through the air as they ran across the grass, kicking a ball or chasing each other around the ranch. For the first time in a long while, they looked like kids again, happy and carefree, not burdened by the worries Sarah had carried for so long. At night, the family gathered around the large table in the dining room, sharing meals prepared by Henry's staff. The food was always plentiful, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort and warmth in the familiarity of shared meals. The children had become close to Henry, always asking questions about the animals or the land. He never once made them feel like they were a burden. Instead, he treated them with the same respect and kindness he had shown Sarah from the beginning. One evening, as they all sat around the table, Henry leaned back in his chair and looked at Sarah. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Sarah had been thinking about that question for a while. She had spent so many months worrying about surviving, about just getting by. But now, for the first time in a long time, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was enjoying the small moments with her children, watching them grow stronger and more confident each day. She was waking up every morning with a sense of purpose, no longer just wondering how to make it through another day. "I feel good," Sarah said, smiling softly. "I never thought I would say that again, but I do." Henry nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's good to hear," he said. "Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, to have a fresh start." Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude. She had come to the ranch with nothing but a desire to keep her children safe, and now, in this peaceful place, she had found something more. She had found a community, a place where she could work live, and most importantly, heal. As the days passed, Sarah found herself becoming more comfortable with the people at the ranch. The workers were kind, and many of them had come from backgrounds similar to hers. They were people who had known hardship, who had worked hard to get where they were. There was no judgment here, only understanding and support. It was a place where Sarah could grow, not just as a worker, but as a person. She started to feel more confident in herself, in her ability to contribute. It wasn't just the job she had that made her feel this way. It was the sense of belonging, the knowledge that she was part of something bigger than herself. One afternoon, Henry called Sarah into his office. She had grown used to his gentle way of speaking, but there was a certain seriousness in his tone this time. She stood in the doorway, unsure of what to expect. Henry gestured to the chair in front of his desk, and Sarah sat down, her heart racing a little. "Sarah," Henry began, "I've been thinking. You've been doing a great job here, and I can see how much you care about this place. But I also know that you're capable of more. You've been through a lot, and you've come out stronger. I want to offer you something more." Sarah blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm offering you the chance to run one of the smaller operations here on the ranch," Henry said. "There's a section of the farm that's not being used to its full potential. I think you'd be perfect for it. You've shown that you can handle the work, and I believe you can do more if given the chance." Sarah's mind spun. She had never imagined herself running anything, let alone a section of a ranch. She had always felt that she was just a mother and a worker, never anything more. But now Henry was offering her an opportunity she had never thought possible. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "You're more ready than you think," Henry replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "This place is growing, and we need people who are willing to step up and take responsibility. You've already shown that you can do that." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and fear. She wasn't sure if she could do it, but at the same time, the idea of taking on more, of proving to herself that she was capable, was something she couldn't ignore. "I'll give it a try," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'll do my best," Henry smiled. That's all anyone can ask for. That evening, as Sarah stood on the porch looking out over the land, she felt a sense of pride. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something. She was starting over, and for the first time in years, she felt like she had a future to look forward to. The pain of the past wasn't gone, but it no longer defined her. She was beginning to realize that the future was hers to shape. And with that realization, Sarah finally felt ready to embrace the possibilities ahead. The weeks that followed seemed to pass in a blur for Sarah. As she began to take on more responsibility at Henry's ranch, she realized just how much she had grown. It wasn't just the physical work that was demanding. It was the mental challenge of overseeing a section of the ranch, making decisions, and learning how to balance it all. At first, she questioned whether she was ready for such a role. But as she stood in the barn, managing the workers and watching the animals thrive under her care, she started to believe in herself in ways she hadn't before. Every morning, she woke up with a sense of purpose, eager to get to work. Her confidence grew with each task she completed, no matter how small. From feeding the cattle to making sure the fields were properly tended, Sarah felt like she was becoming a part of something larger than herself. She was no longer just a mother struggling to survive. She was a key member of the team, someone whose contributions mattered. And the more she did, the more she realized how much she had to offer. Henry continued to offer his support, but he never pushed her too hard. He was there when she needed advice, but he also trusted her to make decisions on her own. It was this trust that made Sarah feel truly valued. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, struggling to get by, and now she was in a position where her hard work and dedication were recognized. One afternoon, as Sarah stood in the field overseeing the workers, Henry walked over to her with a smile. "You're doing great, Sarah. I knew you had it in you," he said, his voice filled with pride. Sarah felt a rush of warmth at his words. She had heard compliments before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just praise for the job she was doing. It was acknowledgement that she was capable, that she was worthy of success. She hadn't felt that way in years, maybe ever. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I'm just trying to keep up with the work." Henry chuckled. "You're doing more than keeping up. You're leading, and that's exactly what this place needs." It was in that moment that Sarah realized how far she had come. Just a few months ago, she had been living in her car, unsure of how she would keep her children fed or where they would sleep. And now, here she was, running a section of a thriving ranch, helping others and making a life for her family. The children were thriving as well. They had adapted to life on the ranch just as easily as Sarah had. They loved their new school, and Sarah could see how happy they were in the evenings when they played outside, running around with the other kids. For the first time in what felt like forever, her children didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from. They had a roof over their heads and a future that seemed bright. Every evening after a long day's work, Sarah would sit with them around the dinner table, laughing and talking about their day. The sound of their laughter filled the house, and for Sarah, it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. These moments were everything she had dreamed of for them, moments of joy, of security, of peace. She was giving her children a life she had never thought possible, and it was all thanks to the kindness of a man who had seen her when she felt invisible. As time went on, Sarah found herself taking on more responsibilities outside of the ranch. She began to participate in community events, helping organize local gatherings and charity drives. Her newfound confidence made it easier for her to connect with others, and she soon found herself becoming an integral part of the community. She wasn't just the mother who had been given a second chance. She was a woman who had earned it, through hard work, determination, and a willingness to learn and grow. The sense of purpose Sarah had found was not limited to her work on the ranch. She had begun to think about the future in a new way. She dreamed of one day owning her own piece of land, of building a home for her family that they could truly call their own. It was a dream she had never dared to entertain before, but now it felt possible. With Henry's support, she began to plan for a future where she could build something that was all hers. One evening, as she sat with Henry after dinner, she shared her thoughts. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice soft. "Maybe one day I could buy a small piece of land. I want to build something for my kids, a place that's ours where we can start fresh. What do you think?" Henry looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said, his voice sincere. "You've got the skills to do it, and I believe you can make it happen. You've come so far already, Sarah. I have no doubt that you can build the life you want." His words filled her with a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years. The thought of owning land, of building a home for her family, seemed so far-fetched just a few months ago. but now it felt within reach. With every day that passed, Sarah felt more and more like the woman she had always wanted to be, strong, capable, and ready to face whatever the future held. As the seasons changed, so did Sarah. She was no longer the woman who had been afraid to ask for help, the woman who had been resigned to living in survival mode. She was now a woman who had taken control of her life, who had built something meaningful, and who was ready to keep growing. And through it all, Henry remained a steady presence in her life. He didn't just provide her with a place to stay or a job, he had given her something far more valuable, the belief in herself. He had seen her potential long before she did, and he had patiently waited for her to see it too. As Sarah looked out over the ranch one evening, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the fields, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had found a home, not just in the physical sense, but in her own heart. She had found the strength to rebuild her life, to dream of something better for her children, and to believe that anything was possible. She was no longer the desperate, hopeless woman she had been when she first arrived at Henry's ranch. She was someone who had earned her place in the world, someone who was capable of achieving her dreams. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah knew that her future was bright. As Sarah continued to grow in confidence and strength, she felt the weight of the past lifting off her shoulders, little by little. Her days were filled with hard work, but they were no longer defined by the constant worry and fear she had once known. There was a rhythm to her life now, a sense of purpose that gave her days meaning. The ranch was no longer just a place where she had landed. It had become her home, her family's safe haven. And with each passing day, Sarah felt more and more connected to the land and the life she was building. She had come a long way from the woman who had walked into Henry's life, unsure and broken. The Sarah who had arrived, unsure of where her next meal would come from, was now a woman who not only had the means to support her family, but had the confidence to envision a future that was all her own. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Every morning she would wake up early, the soft glow of the rising sun casting long shadows across the fields outside. She took the time to sit quietly for a moment, allowing herself to appreciate the peace she had found. It was a peace she had never known before, a peace that came from stability, from knowing that she and her children were safe. The kids had become more than just survivors of a difficult past. They were thriving. Noah, the youngest, had taken to the animals, learning how to care for them with the same gentle touch that Sarah had once used to comfort them in the hard times. Emma, the middle child, had developed a love for painting, spending hours sitting in the meadow, capturing the beauty of the ranch on paper. And Alex, the oldest, had begun to show an interest in the ranch's mechanics, learning how to fix machinery and take care of the equipment. The three of them were growing into their own, blossoming in the environment Sarah had always dreamed of for them. Sarah couldn't help but smile as she watched them play in the yard one afternoon. She had never seen them so carefree, so full of life. They were no longer the anxious, quiet children she had once seen in the backseat of a car, looking for a safe place to sleep. They were happy, confident, and secure. One day, as Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sunset with a sense of contentment, Henry approached her. His face was thoughtful, and as he sat beside her, she could tell that something was on his mind. "Sarah," he began, his voice calm but earnest, "I've been thinking about what you said about your dream of having your own land, and I think it's time we make that dream a reality." Sarah turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" she asked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Henry smiled and gestured toward the land surrounding them. "I've been considering the possibility of you taking on more here. Not just running a section of the ranch, but actually owning a piece of it. You've worked hard, you've proven yourself, and I believe you've earned it." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The thought of owning land, of having something that was truly hers, seemed too big to even imagine. But Henry's words didn't sound like a suggestion. They felt like an opportunity, a real chance to make her dream come true. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Henry nodded. "Absolutely, you've done more than just work here. You've made a home for yourself and your kids. You've earned the right to build something for yourselves, and I think you're ready." The idea of owning land had seemed so far out of reach just a few months ago. Sarah had been surviving, just trying to make it through each day. Now, Henry was offering her the chance to create something for her family, to build a future in a way she had never imagined possible. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Henry worked together to make the dream a reality. They carefully selected a parcel of land on the outskirts of the ranch, a beautiful piece of property with a view of the rolling hills and the distant mountains. It wasn't the biggest plot of land, but it was perfect for Sarah and her family. It was a place where they could grow, a place that could be theirs. As they walked the land, Sarah's heart filled with emotion. This wasn't just land. It was a symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for. It was the beginning of a new chapter for her family, a chapter where they were in control of their own future. She could already see the house they would build, the gardens they would plant, and the animals they would raise. The dream she had once thought impossible was now within her grasp. The process of buying the land was smooth, thanks to Henry's guidance and support. He helped Sarah navigate the paperwork and the legalities, offering advice when she needed it. But it was clear that this was her decision, her opportunity to make something for herself. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward Henry, not just for the land, but for believing in her when she hadn't believed in herself. The moment Sarah officially took ownership of the land was one of the most emotional moments of her life. She stood in the middle of the property, the wind gently brushing through the grass, and for the first time in years she felt like she truly belonged. This was her land, her future. She could see her children playing here, running freely, just as she had once dreamed. As the weeks went on, Sarah and her family began to make plans for the land. They worked together to clear the area, planting trees and preparing the ground for a small garden. Henry, as always, was there to help, offering guidance and sharing his knowledge of farming and ranching. But Sarah had grown so much since she had first arrived at the ranch. She now understood the land in a way she hadn't before. It was no longer just a place to work. It was a place to nurture, to grow, and to create. With each passing day, Sarah's sense of pride in the land grew. She wasn't just working for someone else anymore. She was working for herself, for her family, and the hard work paid off. The land began to take shape, and soon they had a small garden, a modest barn, and even a few animals. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Sarah's children, too, had taken to the land with enthusiasm. They helped plant the garden, cared for the animals, and learned how to tend the land. They were growing up in a way Sarah had never imagined. They were learning the value of hard work, of patience, and of creating something from nothing. They were also learning to believe in themselves, just as Sarah had learned to believe in her own abilities. One evening, as Sarah stood in the field, watching her children run and play, she realized just how far they had come. She had gone from a woman with nothing to a woman who now had a piece of the world to call her own. The road had been long, but it had been worth every step. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her home. And most importantly, she had found the courage to believe that anything was possible.